Hello, my name is Gareth Davies. I'm Managing Director of Aquaterra, based here in Orkney, and I'm going to talk today about the Orkney context for decarbonisation and sustainability. The world we live in today is facing unprecedented challenges in relation to its energy systems. These are relating to the influence that energy is having on climate change, the fact that our energy systems are not affordable to all of the people who need them, and the pace of change in our energy systems is held back by vested interests and regulatory inertia. So, to achieve the pace and depth of change that is needed to combat climate change, we need to start believing, imagining, thinking, planning, doing, and achieving things that frankly have not been thought possible before. Effectively, the status quo is not an option anymore. So what is Orkney's role within that context? As a small group of islands off the coast of Scotland, how is Orkney relevant to what's happening in other places? Well, the reality is that over the last 2 decades, Orkney has made great strides in terms of its own sustainable energy systems. And that's something that's grabbed attention in Scotland, in the UK, in Europe, and across the world. And those changes and the achievements that we've made have been linked to the policy frameworks of each of those levels of activity. So we're relevant to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, we're relevant to the targets that the EU has set for decarbonisation, and we're also relevant to both UK and Scottish policy frameworks for decarbonisation and sustainability. And not least, we're also aligned with our own community ambitions in terms of creating a more sustainable and decarbonised future for our own purposes. So underpinning all of these policy objectives is the pace at which we're going to achieve decarbonisation. The UK has set out its stall by identifying 2050 as a time when it's going to meet net zero. In Scotland, we've come 5 years earlier and said we're going to achieve net zero by 2045. But we can't all arrive at 2044 and then suddenly jump across to that decarbonised state. So there's going to have to be places and communities that get there first. And Orkney's been putting up its hand and saying, we're a place which can achieve this ahead of other places and help be a lighthouse community for other communities to follow. If we're going to achieve that role of being a lighthouse community, we probably need to achieve decarbonisation by 2030. And there's a lot of work now going into looking at how that can be achieved. And that's part of what I want to set out today. But achieving decarbonisation isn't just one figure, it isn't just one metric. There's a number of other facets to our life and to our energy system that fit underneath that. And some of those are listed here on the table. So we need to think not only about how much energy we generate, we need to think about the ways that we use energy, how efficiently we use energy. We need to think about the people that are employed to deliver the energy, and we need to think about training and educating people to contribute to those energy systems. So it's not just about decarbonisation, it's about developing a whole system that can support that decarbonisation process. So a key part of the decarbonisation process is where we get our energy from. Since 2013, Orkney has had all of its electrical demand met by indigenous renewable energy. So we've been self-sufficient for renewable energy since 2013. And along with that wind contribution, we've also had a much smaller but still significant photovoltaic contribution, and also a contribution from the wave and tidal sector, and a very small amount from hydro. And that spread of technologies is matched, for example, by our neighbours in Shetland, albeit at a different and lower level. In the Western Isles, they've also had significant contributions from hydro and anaerobic digestion, but a lesser contribution to the Western Isles. And neither of these island groups have achieved that 100% electrical energy threshold that has been achieved in Orkney. So in terms of the energy production, we're in quite a good place. But it's also about the non-electrical activity. And this slide shows our total energy stack. It shows all the different ways that we use energy for not just electricity, but also for heating and for transport. And what you can see here in the middle is that many of our energy streams are still reliant on hydrocarbons. And the reality is, in fact, that 85% of our total energy use is still on the basis of hydrocarbons. And so our huge challenge between now and 2030 is to convert all these other uses of energy into renewable energy sources. Now, along with that energy challenge, we also have to manage our economy to make sure that this transition is sustainable for everybody. And this slide shows some interesting data which shows the pattern of economic privilege and deprivation in different local authorities in Scotland. Effectively, these shapes here show the level of privilege in the top and the level of deprivation at the bottom. And what you can see is that places like Aberdeen, Edinburgh, East Renfrewshire and East Dunbartonshire, for example, have quite high levels of privilege and relatively low levels of deprivation. On the other hand, places like Dundee, East Ayrshire, Inverclyde, for example, have much higher levels of deprivation and less levels of priority. Now, Orkney, as shown here, kind of sits in the middle. We have relatively small levels of privilege and not extreme levels of deprivation. And our pattern of economic privilege is very similar to that we see in Shetland and in the Western Isles. So we have a distinctive island pattern compared to the variety of patterns we see in the Scottish mainland. And this economic reality that we have to face is something that we feel in the energy spectrum. So here, this slide shows the energy prices that we have to pay for electricity. And what you can see is in the Highlands and Islands, we pay proportionally more for our electricity than happens in other places. And alongside that, our use of energy is also higher than in other places as well. So what we end up with is a level of fuel poverty that is much higher than in other parts of the country. On average, across Orkney, we have levels of fuel poverty that are around 60%. But this map shows the distribution of fuel poverty within Orkney itself, and it shows that there's relatively lower levels around Kirkwall and some of these mainland areas, but much higher levels in Hoy and some of the outer isles in the north, where fuel poverty levels can reach 70%. So fuel poverty is an issue for Orkney, but it's an issue across Orkney to different degrees as well. And as well as fuel poverty, we also have issues around mobility and the affordability of mobility. So our fuel prices in Orkney are about 5% higher for petrol and 10% higher for diesel than would be found in other parts of the country. And that obviously impinges on how much it costs us to move from place to place. And if you look at the distances that we have to travel to reach services, we have a relatively high level of transportation needs compared to other parts of the country. So as well as fuel poverty, we're probably in a state of mobility poverty as well. Now, given these challenges and the problem that our existing energy systems are not really addressing this, we need to have a new system for the future. And there's a really exciting project which is just about to be launched called Reflex, where 6 local organisations have been working over the last year to create a framework which will allow us effectively to create a local energy company. And that local energy company will be working across the integrated energy system, including electricity, including heat, and including transport, to try and deliver more affordable solutions to people to take them forward towards decarbonisation. And that effort not only, as I say, looks at electricity and heat, but also includes transport and the full breadth of transport solutions. So we're looking at vehicles, we're looking at domestic vehicles like cars, we're looking at industrial and commercial vehicles like lorries, but there's also projects looking into decarbonising aircraft and also looking into decarbonisation of agriculture and public transport. And along with these landward activities, we've also got a need to decarbonise shipping. If you think back to that Sankey diagram, the marine oils are a significant part of our energy mix. Now, Orkney is at a maritime crossroads where we have ferries coming to the Isles, we've got fishing and aquaculture boats and work boats working within the Isles, and we're also at a very strategic location in terms of global shipping routes. At the present time, those shipping routes pass really from the Atlantic to the Baltic and into the Scandinavian peninsula. But in the future, as the Arctic ice melts, there's something called the Northern Maritime Corridor, which could open up by 2030 for traffic between Europe and the Pacific across the North Pole. And that puts Orkney at the forefront of one end of that route and could transform the interest that there is in terms of maritime trade and therefore the need for refueling of vessels in decarbonised fuels in the future. So the kind of fuels that are being thought about for that future shipping opportunity are related to hydrogen, ammonia, and derivatives of hydrogen. And Orkney has taken great steps in the last 5 years to establish a unique hydrogen infrastructure where we've been able to test and demonstrate different hydrogen technology and to learn so much about how that needs to be installed and operated and used. And what we're now seeking to do as a community is leverage that experience to bring to bear that hydrogen production into small vessels first of all, and then move to larger vessels, but also to bring it into the vehicle fleet, and particularly the larger vehicles where it's going to have a competitive advantage. In addition to the energy demand and our generation onshore, there's also interest in generating energy offshore. And at this particular moment, there's a great interest in what's called the ScotWind leasing round, and that is set to possibly release 17 gigawatts of seabed area around Orkney, which could be exploited for offshore wind activities. And these developments would take place using next generation of turbines, which would be 15 to 20 megawatts in size. The ones that we currently have onshore here in Orkney are up to 2.75 megawatts in size, so these would be much bigger turbines, but they would be offshore and remote from the coast where they're actually deployed. But as well as being deployed, they need to be serviced and looked after and maintained, and Orkney could have a particularly important role there in relation to Scapa Flow. Now, Scapa Flow is Europe's biggest natural harbour, 50 square kilometres of deep water. And the UK government just last week came out with a call for communities and places with strategic port infrastructure to consider whether it would be possible to house a 100-hectare development for supporting offshore wind. And this diagram shows that 100-hectare area, if you like, to scale within Scapa Flow. And so a question that's being asked is, could Scapa Flow provide a platform or a solution for a port development of that scale to support this offshore wind activity? And here you can see an aerial view of Scapa Flow as it's used at the moment. So this is obviously servicing the oil and gas sector, and here with a range of oil tankers and a ship-to-ship transfer operation going on. So the question is, can we move from a position where Scapa Flow is used for handling oil fuels to a position where it's used for facilitating renewable energy development? Now, all of these innovations and developments are quite widespread and all-encompassing within Orkney, and it would probably be beneficial to have an organisational structure that could bring these together. And over the summer, a number of us were working on the idea of creating what's called an innovation freeport within Orkney. And this is a concept which links to the current government's ideas for free ports, which they're introducing around the rest of the UK. Now, in the innovation freeport, what we're seeking to do is to get recognition of Orkney as a centre of excellence under the three headline banners of energy, transport and digital enterprise. We're looking for a mandate for Orkney to lead innovation in these areas, and then looking for fiscal and regulatory flexibility for us to be allowed to innovate in these areas and to basically find solutions for the future. And all of this would be built upon the foundations that we've laid over the last 20 years of creating Orkney as a living laboratory in these three areas. So the financial opportunities associated with this kind of development are absolutely huge. That ScotWind development alone is thought to potentially amount to around 12 or 13 billion pounds of investment over the next 10 years. And if you look at all of the other decarbonisation activities that could take place across the Northern and Western Isles, the total package of investment that may be associated with that over the next 10 years is about 20 billion pounds. Now that's an absolutely staggering level of money, but actually it's not unprecedented in terms of the types of investment that have happened before. For example, when the Flotter Oil Terminal was established and the offshore oil industry came to the islands, including Southern Moor and Shetland. And also in terms of renewables, if we think of all the activities that have happened in the last 20 years, they come to around £1 billion of investment in Orkney alone. So these scales of investment are not unprecedented, but there's a huge opportunity out there, and we need to think about whether we want to go for that, and if we do, how do we go about securing that? And just to put that in some kind of context, that £20 billion compares with around £30 million that we're currently going for as a community under the Islands deal in terms of the energy part of that. So that Islands deal represents about 1% of the total opportunity that there is in energy across the three island groups. So to conclude, Orkney, Scotland, the UK and the wider world face unprecedented pressures and challenges. And over the last 20 years in particular, Orkney has worked extremely hard and invested huge amounts of effort and money to be relevant in these times. It's a question then for us as a community about, has the time come for Orkney to deliver on that prospectus by actually taking an accelerated pathway towards decarbonising the way we live and the way we work, perhaps hosting major offshore and onshore renewables generation, pioneering the search and the application of new fuels such as hydrogen, and developing an infrastructure that's appropriate for the 21st century, and through that act as a major strategic innovation hub. Is Orkney the place where a green and sustainable future is created? Thank you.